If you show a gun in the first act, somebody's got to get shot in the second act.
I think that people have lost their minds, and we must not also lose our minds.
5 people got up to heckle me in the middle of a sermon and walked out.
How successful are you if the message is heard, but it doesn't lead to the action?
There is anti-Semitism underlying a lot of our politics.
Jews can become so universal that they're willing to fight for the rights of others, but when it comes to their own children, they're not.
This is a very special live episode of Being Jewish with Jonah Platt. Yeah. Good. That's what we want from a live audience. So glad to know you're here and alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. Thanks entirely to the generosity of Schusterman Family Philanthropies, Crown Family Philanthropies, and the Jim Joseph Foundation. So thank you so much. Truly. And a special shout out to the Schusterman events team for putting this together, this gorgeous night. Beautiful, thank you. And my ace in the hole, David Ritberg, thank you for making this happen from soup to nuts. Also, a shout out to my Aunt Wendy, who's here, who works for Crown. It was her birthday on Sunday, so happy belated, Aunt Wendy, I love you. If you are here in the room with me tonight, Mazal Tov, you made it to the hottest ticket in San Diego, apparently. We squeezed you in. We got Jews up to the rafters in here. Those of you listening or watching at home, thank you for being here, as always, with me tonight. And it is now my pleasure to introduce my 2 esteemed guests, Jewish American rabbinic icons of the highest order, who are at the vanguard of a generation of leaders reimagining what synagogue life can be in the 21st century. They have built spiritual communities in their own images, taken their unique perspectives of what contemporary Judaism should be and breathed it into life with their words, passion, and tireless leadership, and also drum circles. One is the founding rabbi of IKAR, an egalitarian, IKAR. Some Angelinos in the house. An egalitarian, non-denominational, music-forward community in Los Angeles rooted in social justice with robust programming and children running wild through the aisles. The other is the founding rabbi of Romemu, which is an egalitarian, non-denominational, music-forward community in New York City, rooted in a deeply embodied approach to Jewish spirituality with robust programming and children running wild through the aisles. Together, they're helping to answer the question of what revitalized Judaism should look like, and they're here with us tonight. So please welcome Rabbis Sharon Brous and David Ingber.
Thank you. Welcome. All right, get cozy. As I mentioned, your 2 incredible congregations, which obviously many people in this room know a lot about, but perhaps not everybody watching or listening to this at home knows about. I'd like to ask each of you about the congregations that you have founded and what were the core assumptions about Judaism and Jewish communal life that you are challenging with your own vision of what that should look like? So Rabbi Brous, let's start with you.
All right. First of all, thank you. It's such a joy to be here. It's absolutely stunning, and both inside and outside this room. So thank you. And Jonah, happy to be with you, and always with my friend, Rabbi David. IKAR was born at the intersection of 2 questions. The first was, how can we mine our Jewish inheritance to live lives of meaning and purpose? And the second was, who are we called to be as Jews and human beings in a time of moral crisis? Those were the 2 questions that literally were keeping me up at night. And we launched the community because we sensed that there were other people who also weren't sleeping well. And we wanted to, at least if we're not sleeping, we should be together. Based on those 2 questions, you can see there's kind of an internal and an external element. And we were really trying to address both. What can we do to reinvigorate and reanimate Jewish ritual and tradition? How can we bring life back into Mishloach Manot? Like how can we make Yom Kippur? No Mishloach Manot recipients here from IKAR. Thank you. So, for me, I wanted to feel spiritually alive, and I wanted to create an environment that people could come and dance and cry and sing and feel deeply connected to each other and to our tradition. And I wanted that sense of connection and togetherness to help fuel our commitment to building a more just and loving society.
Rabbi Ingber, same question to you. Core assumptions that you're challenging.
Well, I just want to start also where Sharon started, which is how beautiful it is to be here. It's good. Just to be sitting together itself is already a practice. Like sitting together is amazing. And to be in conversation with you, Sharon, is always really a privilege. Thanks. Romemu, in a world of seekers who were leaving or who had never discovered Judaism before and its riches, someone like me who had been on a journey from Orthodoxy, I grew up in an Orthodox home and then left it, but found spirituality outside of Judaism compelling. And when I returned to Judaism, I thought, oh, these things are here in a way that I had not been taught. And so I think Romemu was born from a place of knowing how many Jews I met at Buddhist retreat centers.
Right.
And how many Jews were doing, yoga asana and all these kinds of things. And I was like, oh, where is that happening in New York? And where is it happening in a way that would feed my neshama, my soul? Like I always would say that Rome was a place where I didn't personally feel like parts of myself were left outside. I wanted those parts to be brought into a sacred community and have a community that was strong enough to hold tradition with radically irreverent elements and things that would generally not be considered, a part of the synagogue. I grew up in Great Neck, New York, or when I was an Orthodox kid in Chaim, Berlin. Those things were not there. Silence and movement and ecstasy and crying and fully embodied Jewish life. In my family, God was a really important part of my spiritual world. And I wanted to be in a liberal, progressive space where God wasn't like a joke line, like we were too sophisticated to talk about how God was a part of our lives, and that we could open our hearts to the divine. And so I thought that someone who had what I used to call post-traumatic God disorder, like I had a lot of God pain and scar tissue.
Yeah.
What would it be like to create a space where that would begin to heal? And like Sharon was saying, it really was about aliveness. I love that you used that phrase, aliveness. I think it was about creating a space that felt really alive.
When somebody comes to Romemu who maybe has never been there before and they bump against it and it's not for them, what is it that they're bumping against? Like, what have you found to be sort of the chief obstacle to somebody feeling like this is for them?
Wow, I love that question. That's like asking somebody, what do you think the date went wrong? Why didn't it, Wow. Depending on when you came to Romemu, maybe in the beginning it might have been lacked institutional gravitas, potentially. It could have been that it was a little bit too, the hippy-dippy would be the phrase, a little bit too out there, a little bit too, weird. I think that those in the beginning, it was like that. Rome itself has changed over time, but I think that, it can be a bit strange for people who are used to performative Judaism to walk into a place where people close their eyes and feel real devotion, and it can feel a little bit scary to them, or people get up and dance. Like, what are you doing?
Same question for you, Rabbi Brous, about IKAR.
Nobody's ever walked into IKAR and not loved it.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Exactly. That's why she's here.
Yeah, 22 years later.
Exactly.
I think the kids are very loud. That might be one thing, because we built this playground in the sanctuary. We got this from the Christians. We did not invent this on our own, but there was some church in the Midwest that had a playground and they had like soft toys and on a little area. And I thought, that's exactly right, because you don't want the kids out of the room when like the spirit is happening in the room. It can get a little chaotic. So we're working on that. There is something about the combination of really good music and speaking a moral message that really speaks to some people and does not speak to other people. And I understand it and I honor it. And I sometimes think, thank God we're in a city with 100 synagogues. So if this isn't what you're looking for, you'll probably find what you're looking for. In the last 2 years, or 2.5 years, I should say, there are people who left for other reasons. People wanted or needed their rabbi to be the avatar of exactly their perspective on whatever had happened that day in Gaza or whatever had happened that day at Columbia University. And if I didn't say exactly what they needed, exactly the way they needed it, they left. And I think, thank God there are 100 synagogues in this city and the chairs are much more comfortable in most of them. So I hope, God bless you. But I really tried to communicate again and again. And this is so with like real tenderness that you don't actually want your rabbi to be your mouthpiece. You want your rabbi to be a person who lives deeply in an ancient tradition and then works to translate that tradition into our times with love so that we can figure out how to live better lives and how to find hope in really dark times. And so that means I'm going to have different views than some people in the community will have sometimes. And that's actually a good thing. And maybe something we'll talk a little bit more about this evening. But surely I will say we lost a few people at the outer edges of our medium tent in the last 2.5 years. And it's okay. Actually, it's okay because I always say we don't want to be a small tent where everybody thinks exactly the same way because that would be incredibly boring. And we really don't need to be a big tent because there are certain views and perspectives that are anathema to our core values, like people who think that publicly shaming and blaming other people is the way to advance a social good. That's not really our vibe. People who advocate violence against innocents, like that's not something we're going to be supportive of in our environment. But we're a medium tent. And sometimes in the medium tent, it's uncomfortable when you're the people who are at the outer edge over here and the outer edge over here. And yet the beauty of the medium tent is those people are having Shabbos lunch together. And so we really try to advocate for a space in which people are able to be uncomfortable. It's a little much for some people. They don't want to be uncomfortable. So those are the two people that have walked out of IKAR in the last 22 years. That's why.
I actually can relate to what you're articulating as that avatar piece. I don't think that's specific just to rabbis. I mean, I've had people like the one day that I say the one thing that is not on their checklist of 50 things, now they're out. Right? It has to be all 50 at all times.
Or you don't say, you don't say something, you say it, you don't say it, you sign the letter, you don't sign the letter. And so I think it's because of people feel so powerless in this time and so full of sorrow. And they want people who have a microphone in front of them to say the thing that needs to be said. And I understand it, but that's not our job. We have to do our own moral discernment and speak from a place of truth, which might not make everybody happy all the time.
With the social justice pillar of what you and IKAR are doing, how do you translate the inspiration that you're giving at the pulpit or on YouTube to going out and doing the thing? And how important is that? Is it enough just to change the mindset? It's mission accomplished, or okay, great, you're thinking, but you actually have to get up and go do. Do you need both?
When we started the community in 2004. I felt we were living through a time of moral crisis, Like I really meant it. I really meant it in 2004 because I just thought, disease and poverty and war and violence and like, who are we called to be? And now you look at that and you're like, I'll take 2004 any day. But in fact, I feel the fierce urgency of now. And my work is not only to put my body in the right place, but to help move the spirits of the people who are listening, whether they're, in their tuchuses or in the gym in Shalhevet, or they're listening online, to ask themselves, to do their own discernment work and say, where should I be putting my voice right now? What should I be writing? Where should I be going? Do I go to Minneapolis? Do I, do I stand up? Do I speak out? Do I quietly heal? We saw the heroic images of Minneapolis, but some of the bravest people built a diaper brigade where they were just making sure that people who were scared to leave their homes could take care of their children. And it's really quiet, humble work, but you have to be awakened to your responsibility for your neighbor to do that. And so I see the work not as, preaching the sermon that people are going to be talking about, but as kind of awakening each one of us in our own way to step into the labor in this time of where it really does matter.
To drill down a little bit on the initial question, how successful are you if the message is heard but it doesn't lead to the action? Has the message landed?
I'm hoping the message is landing. Yeah. Look, I will tell you sometimes because it looks really different for each person. So, the famous story in Masechet Gitin of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza. We study this often on Tisha B'Av, but it's the story of a guy's throwing a party. The Schustermans are throwing a party and they send out invitations and the servant goes out and he accidentally gives an invite to Bar Kamtza instead of Kamtza. It's like a mistake anybody could make. And Bar Kamtza shows up, but he and the host have a terrible rift. And the host sees him, and it's a beautiful party. And the host says, "Get out, leave," in front of everybody. And the guy says, "Please don't make me leave. I'll pay for what I eat. Just let me stay." And the host says, "No, you have to leave." He says, "I'll pay for half the party." "No, you have to leave." "I'll pay for the whole entire party." "No, you must leave." And the rabbis say it was because the rabbis were in the room and witnessed this humiliation and didn't do anything about it that led to the destruction of Jerusalem, right? It's such a profound teaching. And I always thought that what they were saying was that one of those rabbis needed to stand up in the moment and say to the host, "No, let him stay." And I just started realizing in the last few months that no, there's so many things that the rabbis could have done. They could have quietly walked over to the host and tapped him on the shoulder and said, like, "Hey, come with me, by the way," like maybe quietly let him stay. They could have gone out after Bar Kamtza and said to him, like, "Hey, this guy, he's still hurt from the thing that happened to you, but I'm really sorry, that shouldn't have happened," right? Like they could have invited him over to their house. They didn't do anything. But there are all these different roles that each of us can play. And when the world is on fire, we need people who have hoses, to put out the fire, and we need people to sound the alarm, and we need people to warn the neighbors. There's all different kinds of work that we need to do. And so I don't think we can necessarily, it's not about how many people show up at the protest on the corner. This is about fundamentally changing the culture that we're living in so that people feel responsible for building a just and loving society worthy of an image of God. And that is the holiest and most important work that I think we can do in this time.
I love that. Rabbi Ingber, same question. How do you, if you remember what the question was? So much of what you all are doing is about what happens in the space when you're all there together, what you're doing internally and physically in the body. How important is that to carry outside the space, and how do you try to make sure that's happening?
I grew up going to an Orthodox day school, and I spent 7 years in Chaim Berlin and other ultra-Orthodox yeshiva contexts. And so just so people don't walk out here thinking Romemu is a yoga studio, we actually use a siddur and lane Kriyas Torah on Shabbos morning and have Kabbalat Shabbat. So it's not about it's the same question because I'm a rabbi of a pretty standard community that does some neo-Hasidic things. So I think it's a big question. I think that I always love Sharon's certainty because it feels great. I think that as someone who's been in the rabbinate, Rome was now 20 years old, and now I'm at the 92nd Street Y, a pretty venerated liberal bastion on the Upper East Side. I'm not altogether sure that anything that I've done over the last 20 years really has made as big a mark as I wish it would have. The uphill battle, is almost Sisyphean struggle as a liberal progressive rabbi, is that we live in a deeply consumerist world in which we commodify Jewish life, and really good Jewish institutions generally have to have really good programs and good products. And we fall prey, unless we're lucky enough to, if you built your own synagogue to some extent, you have less of the market forces working against you because you went from nothing and you built it and it failed at various moments, but if you stayed true to who you were, you could work that way. But working within a larger Jewish universe, let's just be honest, rabbis, what rabbis say behind closed doors is, how long will they remember that sermon for? Like, how long will that last? Or what can we say to have our communities as serious about Jewish life as we are, because we dedicated our lives to it, right? We take it deeply seriously. It's the same as what Sharon said, like trying my best to move the needle, trying my best to speak into a space and know that I'm going to make those who are comfortable uncomfortable, and those who are uncomfortable, hopefully I'll comfort them. The model still persists amongst my community members. Like I've lost, I was also hoping that question was only for you about members that were lost. But I lost many, many members of my community over the last couple of years who had signed onto Romemu as a spiritual oasis. That's one of the ways they used to talk about it. It's like I come to Romemu and it's like the way I go to yoga class and then I leave and I'm a different person. I go to Romemu and I'm a different person. In the years preceding October 7th and then from October 7th till today, I waded in very, very strongly in a particular direction in the community was not expecting. And I lost many, many members of the community because of the stances that I took and the ways that I spoke into that space. And even to the point where I would sit with somebody like I did a couple of weeks ago, a member of the community who's debating coming back or not, and we met for coffee, and the person said to me, I've been coming with my wife, X number of years, and we always leave, and we're in a certain place. And we come to services now, and after you speak, and we're not enjoying it. And I looked at this person, I said, oh, you're not enjoying? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that was part of what I was supposed to be doing. It's, wisdotainment, I thought I was trying to speak after a confrontation between my own heart and the text and Jewish history and trying to make sense of the moment. And you thought that you were coming for me to make you walk home with a doggy bag of entertainment. Like, oh, that was great, and let's go forward. So I think that a large part of the impact possibility is not only whether or not you have a great product, not only whether or not you wow people and you have sources and you speak passionately, but we're working at almost all moments counterculturally against the momentum of a consumerist world, which almost, it corrodes what it means to be a part of an obligated community. It corrodes what it means to show up even when you don't really care, show up, or even, God forbid, when the rabbi is not as entertaining as you would like them to be, you're still gonna be there. And so that's kind of I guess, how I would set it up for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Appreciate that. So we're sort of dancing around a little bit the idea of what is the role of a rabbi, and that's obviously going to be different for every individual person. Rabbi Ingber, you just sort of spoke about how you went off what is your typical path or might have been expected from you. Can you articulate what that was and perhaps what the calculus for you was in deciding to go on this new path?
I am so thankful that Sharon brought that story from Gittin, the Kamtza and Bar Kamtza story, because I have a Kamtza and Bar Kamtza story that really was the catalyst for where I am today. For those who remember 2019, kind of the end of the year, there was the Women's March, the second Women's March was going to happen. And there was quite a bit of stir because of one of the leaders of the Women's March, a woman named Tamika Mallory, had tweeted a picture of herself with Louis Farrakhan and had called him the greatest of all time. Those four letters, the GOAT, became quite controversial, and the Jewish community was quite hurt and angry, and it led to rifts within the leadership of the Women's March. And certain parts of the march were going to split off and so on, and would have their own march. A progressive rabbi in New York through some backdoor conversations, brought together many of the leading liberal rabbis of New York to gather in a private meeting with Tamika Mallory and her team. And essentially, over the course of an hour or so, maybe longer, things that were said in that room were very, very difficult to hear. And things that were said that were very offensive to Jews and should have been offensive to Jews. And I stood up in one moment and I asked this Tamika Mallory to apologize for what she had posted, just a simple apology and a retraction. This led to even more churn. And by the end of the conversation, one of the rabbis who was there stood up and pointed a finger at me and said, Rabbi Ingber, I am so embarrassed to call you a colleague because you are calling out our ally. None of the rabbis that were there stood up to say a word. Even the rabbis who had gone home with me in a car at the first meeting, there's a second meeting. In the first meeting, we had all left, and all of those rabbis had said to me privately, they could not believe what they had heard in that room privately. And in public, they were not willing to stand up. In the intervening weeks between that event and the sermon, I had heard about my niece had been bullied for being a Zionist on her campus. This is 2020, early 2020. And so I gave a sermon about how we have to raise our flawed flags, that our full Jewish identity should not be erased, and Jews can't participate in erasing themselves in any space in which we show up. We have to be willing to put our flawed flags forward. They're not perfect. Our Torah isn't, even though we call it perfect. We liberal progressives believe the Torah is up for interpretation. And it was based on that sermon, that was the first time I experienced people in my community leaving the shul. 5 people got up to heckle me in the middle of a sermon and walked out. It led to a huge town hall meeting at Romemu. 200 people came, and we found out things about members of our community that we had never known before, about their positions around Israel. that was the beginning of an awakening to me about the ways in which I started to identify my fawning mechanism in spaces where Jews were showing up with allies, where Jews were not showing up in their fullest way and not expecting reciprocated or symmetrical reciprocation from our allies. And that all of it was done with great strategic interest, of course, because allyship was so important and we have shared interests. And this mirrored for me a lot of what I saw in the October 8th universe. That in the post-October 7th universe, there was a period of deep progressive shame, I think, about, or first rage, disappointment, confusion, shattering, fracturing. But in the ensuing months, I began to feel more and more like I didn't belong in the same spaces that I had lived in for 20 years. I felt the more and more I doubled down on Jewish power as a legitimate expression of Jewishness, on the right that Jews had to be not only Zionists, but also to be defending, going to war against or expecting others to call out those who had taken hostages and so on. I started to notice more and more that I didn't feel myself in those spaces, and that my voice in the pulpit became more and more strident. I gave one sermon, and then I'll pass it back. I gave one sermon, I think early on in the war. It was on the parsha where generally we imagine that Abraham speaks truth to power with Sodom and Amorah. Essentially, in chapter 18 of the book of Genesis, classically, Abraham is willing to fight God for the sake of these innocents. And the great question, of course, that's often asked is, why does Abraham, who fights with God in chapter 18, not fight with God in chapter 22 when God asks him to sacrifice Isaac in the Akedah? And I said, because I think sometimes Jews can become so universal that they're willing to fight for the rights of others, but when it comes to their own children, they're not. And I feel that way very strongly still to some extent in this space, but we can discuss that. We can stop there.
Continuing down this path, the role of the rabbi, let's talk a little bit about, and we're sort of there already, politically, what the role of a rabbi should be or shouldn't be. Rabbi Brous, you've been a very public faith leader involved in a number of Democratic administrations and inaugurations. Why is that important to you as a leader? And also, what is your temp check on where the party is now? But that's fair game.
First, thank you for sharing all of this, David. And I responded to this same period in a very different way. And so I think putting this into the discourse is important, and hopefully we can continue to talk more about that.
Do you want to respond to that first?
Sure.
Great.
Which is easier, the temp check on the Democratic Party, or
we can get back to that after.
My first sermon after October 7th was my anguish, horror, and sense of betrayal. We had two board members in our of the IKAR community who had family members who were among those abducted and taken into Gaza. My brother and his family live there. We are very closely entwined. It is as I say to people outside the Jewish world, like, this is a really small family, and half of our family lives in one place and the other half lives in another. And the betrayal was my version of what you described and what you experienced, which was just the silence. The silence was the most, I think, the most was one of the hardest parts for me from people whom I have been in the work with for 20 years. Like, we would fly across the country to get arrested together kind of work.
Yeah.
And one of my very close colleagues in the work wrote me after a week and said, "I don't know what to say, but I love you." And at first I thought, oh, that's nice, because I haven't heard from anyone else. And then I thought, why do you not know what to say? Like, why can't you say it's obviously never okay to rape, abduct, and murder innocent people, and we have to continue to work toward a just future for Israelis and Palestinians alike? Why couldn't you just say that? And that was really shocking for me, that language was not in the discourse. But the sermon was about both of those first two pieces, and then the third, which is, we weren't abandoned by everyone. In fact, there were lots of people in the world who cared deeply about what had happened, But the silence was so deafening that we couldn't even hear the voices of people who are reaching out with love. And so I said, this was not the sermon I wrote, but the sermon I gave in the moment, one of the most emotional Shabbat experiences, just 1 week after this horror show started, was, we've lost so much. Let's not lose our damn minds. When I look back now, I think, oh yeah, that was right. That was right. Because when you feel just like shattered from grief and trauma, and you feel betrayed, you are not your most generous or empathic or careful self. And I didn't want to fall into a trap where I would start to generalize others the way I felt that many Jews were being generalized. And so I tried through I'm not suggesting you're doing that, by the way. What I wanted to make sure that I wouldn't do that over the course of the ensuing period. And so what I've tried to do over the last 2.5 years is, instead of avoiding saying the hard thing, saying all the hard things, like always. And so people don't always leave feeling entertained. They might leave feeling like, oh, I just did the hard work. But I did have beloveds in the community who basically stopped coming for months or even a year because they said, I just can't hear you say the words Palestinian civilian. Until every one of our hostages is home, I can't hear you say those words. And I was like, I understand, but I'm going to keep saying those words. And I had people who left the community because they said, I can't hear you talk about the hostages. The hostages are being used as an excuse for genocide. And I was like, I hope you find the community you're looking for, because I will never stop talking about the hostages until every single one of them is home. And so I decided that I was going to lean into this core belief that I hold, which is that God gave us capacious hearts that are big enough to hold it all. We have this very natural human instinct to narrow our frame of concern. And I understand it. And I sometimes myself feel pulled into it, but God gave us capacious hearts. And so what if every single week when you come to this one place, like, you're not going to get this on Instagram, you're not going to get this on the news, but you're not going to get this on the protests on campus. But what if there's one place where you go and you're just reminded that you have a big heart and that you can actually hold all of that, because it is true. It's all true. Like, the human suffering is there, and the human suffering is there. And this is our family, and this is our human family. And what are we going to do? Can we allow ourselves to feel it?
I see you want to say something.
For me personally, I think that one of the questions that kept animating me throughout the last almost 3 years, there were a group of people who wanted us at Romemu to pray for Palestinian civilians. And that was something that years ago I would have done in a heartbeat. In fact, even before I started saying the prayer for the state of Israel, which now we do every single Shabbat, and we always pray for the IDF, and we also say a broader prayer for peace as well. And I would have named Palestinian suffering, of course, but the assumption that there was a group of people that came along and said, well, why aren't you praying for the Palestinians? Like, there's another synagogue in New York, they wrote one. And I started to think into that question, and I began to interrogate the assumptions of that question. And I found it, after a while, to be exposing something about their assumptions about prayer and about what prayer looks like. Like, there are probably every night in New York City, thousands of people go to sleep on the streets of New York City. Many, many go to sleep hungry. There are, in our cities around America, children dying every single day of hunger, and from silly systems and from our own lack of generosity. And never once in the last 20 years had any congregant ever come over and asked me if we would say a prayer for all of the homeless in New York, explicitly, and ever say a prayer for any of those who are dying of starvation in our country. No one had ever asked me to say a prayer for those who are dying at the hands of Sudanese genocide or any other explicit mention. So what could it possibly mean for them to ask me explicitly? And what is their assumption about my own prayer life? Is my prayer life so judged to be like, I am not capacious enough unless I make the gesture publicly? So it must be a public statement for those people. And what is that public statement? And the public statement for me, it came down to, is them saying, If you don't show me you care, then I don't believe you when you say you do. And if you're not willing to pray for it, and I'll say to them, do you pray for all these other things? Immaterial to me. If you don't pray for the Palestinians, it means that you're complicit somehow and you agree with what's going on. And I thought to myself, that's a lot of assumptions about Jewish prayer and the role it's supposed to play in the synagogue and in my heart. And I started to wonder about that. And it made me question a lot of these gestures or these, some of the things that have to happen in a pastoral moment in our communities. And so I just wonder, in Jewish spaces, are we allowed in Jewish spaces to care, to use our prayer to care about our people when our people, and put them at the center? Because I started asking myself, do I have these expectations of my Muslim brothers and sisters? Do I have expectations of my Hindu brothers and sisters? Will I not sit down at a dais with somebody in an interfaith dialogue who refuses to pray for Israelis and for Jews? So I kind of look, I don't know where you stand with that or those questions and how you would respond to those.
My question sort of fits nicely into that, which is not even in the Jewish space, zooming out, as human beings, as big as our hearts are, we can't fit all the world's suffering into it, no matter how much we want. So there is, by nature, a natural narrowing that must occur, right? I mean, nobody can think about all things everywhere all at once. You can't be everything to everyone all at once. So what is then for you the line? How do you determine what feels morally enough that we're using as much heart as we can?
I don't know how many of you read Rabbi Shai Held's book, which came out in the course of the last, I guess it came out about a year and a half ago, called Judaism is About Love. And he writes about the verse in Leviticus, Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, that you should love your neighbor as yourself. And he says that something along the lines of, progressive Jews like to think that that means you should love the whole world like yourself. But in fact, if you look at the commentary over the course of 2,000 years, almost nobody reads it that broadly. Most people read it as actually saying you should love your fellow Jew as yourself, meaning that Jews have a particular responsibility to our Jewish family. Again, we're a small family, right? If we don't take care of each other, no one will. But he says that's not the only verse that calls us to love in the Torah. In fact, 36 times in the Torah, we're told how to treat the ger, the stranger, the other. In Deuteronomy, for example, it says, "V'ahavtem et hager ki girim ha'item be'eretz Mitzrayim," that you should love the stranger. You know the heart of the stranger because you were strangers in the land of Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt. And so what that means is that we actually have to do both. And people always want to know which one, like, who are you going to care for first? And I'm telling you that, again, like my family, right as we speak, are huddled in a bomb shelter in their home in Renana. And they're always top of mind for me. My family is always top of mind. I love all children. I love my children the most, right? Like I'm sure your kids are amazing. And yours probably are too.
It's funny, I love your kids more than I'm getting.
Like, of course, that's true. That's very human. And also, I will not allow myself to fortify my heart against the second call, which is the call to love each other beyond just our family. And again, I know that we can do both. And I understand the brain science. I've been reading a lot about the brain science behind why we engage in this kind of reductive thinking. And because I'm trying to understand these protests and counter protests, I'm trying to understand how people got so quickly from Israel being attacked to it being Israel's fault. Like, I mean, the immediacy of the accusation of genocide on October 7th, 8th, 9th. I'm trying to understand it. Like, what led to before? Okay, yes, and 10 years before. But like, I want to understand, why does the human mind yearn for hard answers, yeses and nos, blacks and whites? And I want to understand that. And I get that we have a kind of spiritual and cognitive overload that happens to our systems when things are too complicated and when we're asked to hold too much. There's so much sorrow. I can barely contain my own family's sorrow. Why do I have to contain the whole world's sorrow, let alone the Palestinians, whose neighbors are the ones who are responsible for my family's? Like, It's too much. So we want to shut down and we engage in a kind of brain freeze, and it limits the vision, what we can see. And then we get this relief to the system because I don't have to worry about you. I can only worry about my team, my tribe. But the fact is, if you take faith seriously, it does not say that all Jewish people are created in God's own image, male and female. God created the Jews. It says that God created every human being in God's own image. So I just challenge myself, and I challenge all of us to think about what it means to really take that seriously. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to cry, with the same fervor every night or every day. I wouldn't be able to move, but it means that I understand that aspirationally, that's what I'm called. That's how I'm called to live in the world.
I think that that's true, but I'll just say, I agree. I mean, everything you said, it's hard to argue with anything that you're saying. And as someone who's a mystic, 2 weeks ago, I was teaching a group of people the Torah that that one of the great Hasidic rabbis said that at Mount Sinai, we didn't hear the full I am the Lord your God. We only heard the first letter of the first word, not just the I, the ani, but the aleph of the ani. And there was one rabbi who said that the aleph of the first aleph of the I am can be found, actually, it can be framed on your face. It's the two eyes and the nose that kind of look like an aleph if you kind of turn, and it's kind of an interesting meditation. But it's presaging Levinas, right? Levinas, who said that in the naked nudity of the face, the decent nudity of the face is all of ethics is grounded in the face. And so I remember teaching that text, and then the next day going down to City Hall to testify in front of City Council about the buffer bill. And the buffer bill in New York City is to try to create a perimeter of 100 feet around synagogues because of the protesters now who are actually harassing people who are trying to get in. It happened at Park East Synagogue on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and we had a very big, a big to-do about it. And I was sitting there in the gallery with a guy who was sitting next to me with a keffiyeh. We were all sitting in the gallery with keffiyehs, and they were all either Jewish, pro-Palestinians. I don't even know what that word means anymore in terms of I'm pro-Palestinian. I'm certainly not like these guys. And I'm looking at them and going, oh, there's the aleph right there. There's the aleph. And as I was looking at one of them, he walked in front of another activist, an Israeli activist, and leaned over and said, I hate your guts. We can find examples of that everywhere. It's not unique we aren't the only recipients of that, and I'm sure it exists in some form or another. But the question is not whether or not we can love them intrinsically as God's children, which we should and always do. But when push comes to shove, right, I know that when I lived in the progressive circles for 20 years, and I still work in those spaces still, and I identify as a progressive, I never heard anybody ever give a sermon about the danger of Islamic fundamentalism. Never once. Never once in the 20 years in the liberal progressive world did I ever hear anybody ape what Sam Harris has said. Not from a place of love, a place of I love all human beings are created in God's image, but the ideology of hate that is there is much more dangerous than any of the other forms of hatred that we're now, maybe white supremacy, maybe in some form or another, who knows, they're all hatreds. But and if you ask the liberal progressive, I'm not saying Sharon, I'm not saying you, but I'm saying if I ask colleagues, the general prevailing sentiment was we wouldn't want to contribute towards Islamophobia or towards hatred towards Muslims. We wouldn't want to cast a wide aspersion about that ideology. And yet in progressive circles since October 7th, people rail against Jewish extremists without any thought whatsoever about the kind of hate that fawns in the world, as if all Jews are Smotrich and Ben Gvir or these others. And we often are maximalists when it comes to universality and minimalists when it comes to the loving of our more, our different Jewish friends, right? I've never walked into a synagogue in New York City in a liberal progressive space where someone said, love your neighbors, you love yourself, includes the settlers that you don't like. I did a conversation a couple of years ago with a really fascinating organization called Roots. Anybody ever hear of Roots? Hanan Schlesinger is a rabbi in the territory, I guess in the occupied territories, whatever you want to call it. And he has a Palestinian partner. And they came to New York and people showed up en masse from Romemu and from other synagogues on the Upper West Side. And we were sitting in the room and I asked just a random question. I said, How many of you are finding it more difficult to be in the room with the Jewish settler and versus the Palestinian? And of course, you all know the answer, right? It was like they had greater apathy, a greater antipathy towards Hanan than they did towards his Palestinian partner. And so I kind of feel like I'm all for these really grand universal statements, and every human being, every child, there isn't a moment where I don't think about the children who are caught in all of this craziness. Right? There's not a moment where I don't think about it. And it doesn't yet answer the question for me, and the bigger question about in what way can we show up for Jewish, to center Jewish concerns and Jewish survival and our families' fears and our families' longings versus those of others.
We could obviously have this conversation a lot longer than we have been allotted, but we're getting towards the end here, unfortunately. Clarity is so important in a leader. Even if it's shifting, but knowing what you're trying to communicate and committing to that is tough and is important. So I'm curious, how do you check in on that? What are your check-ins? What are the mirrors that you're holding up? How are you testing your own assumptions as you go through to make sure, do I still believe this? Is this right? Have I safeguarded what I think is true? Or do you do that? Is that even something you think about?
That and the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Trying to. One thing that I have learned to do is just slow down, because there's this expectation or assumption in the time that we're living in right now that when something happens, you need to respond immediately to it. There's this like urgency, and why didn't you post yet about that thing? And I've been feeling like we're breaking news networks or something. Like every single individual, leader, person running an organization, clergy, podcast, we're all expected to say something right away. And it takes me a little bit more time.
Baruch Hashem.
I want to think a little bit before I start mouthing off about something. I'll mouth off about it on Shabbos, but I need a couple days, or I need a moment to actually process and to think. And I will say, I have a little kitchen cabinet of people who I really trust, who do not all see things the same way. People who push me from this side and who push me from this side, a very small group. And when I'm giving a really important talk, like a High Holy Day sermon, I will absolutely share that and hear where it lands. It doesn't mean I'm going to change it to make them happy. It means I want to know, because there might be something that I didn't see, or something that I hadn't thought of, or an article I hadn't read, or a way that it's going to land that I didn't think of and it would cause pain. I never want to cause someone pain. If you don't go into the rabbinate if you take joy out of causing people pain. And so I think about that a lot, because we do hurt people with our words, and yet we never want to, and it breaks my heart when I do. And I always also work from the text. I sat down on Friday at noon, pulled out my Chumash and started to learn. And, this past week, and this is what happens every week. And of course, there's so much anguish this week, and there's so much confusion. And it's a hard and strange time to be alive right now. But I had no idea what I was going to do with all of it. And so I drew it from the text. And so for me, I'm not trying to find the verse that's going to validate the idea I have. I'm trying to figure out how to be a vessel for a deeper kind of truth. And that also slows me down, because learning text it's a slow practice. It's not a quick instant gratification practice. Mm-hmm. So I hope that's a sufficient answer.
Of course.
The party's in crisis. Okay.
Yeah.
The party is. Obviously, to state the obvious.
Yeah, that was my line. I was about to say that. So I'll just say, as you were speaking, I was just thinking to myself, and you know this so well. We often, whenever we do the Amidah, we do this daily prayer. We say, Adonai Svatay Tiftach, right? God, open my lips so that I can speak your praise. And I almost wanted to start tonight by saying a similar intention, which is like, may the words that we use tonight open hearts and also minds, but also model what it is to you didn't ask us really tough questions between the two of us, but we have important differences, but mostly we share, exactly the same values about the way we want the world to look. And I had this experience more than once recently where I started posting some things more frequently on social media, and people that I love and care about and admire would see it, and they would kind of publicly say something on the same thread. And then I would privately, text them, and I'd say, hey, if you didn't like what I said, and you're really upset, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, talk to me here. Let's have a private conversation. Then let's go back into the public. But let's remind ourselves that machloket l'shem shamayim is sofa litkayim. If we're having an argument for the sake of heaven, it will endure, and our friendship will endure. And I think that, I think that's an important moment now in our conversations. And it's something that happens also in person that might not be available in some of the mediums in which we actually more often than not find ourselves. Like in person, you remember how much you care about somebody, even if you disagree vehemently about something important that you want for their, they want for their happiness and for their family's well-being and so on. I think that I just make so many mistakes in my life that my wife is very quick to point out. And so, I have really, great mirrors in my life who are consistently letting me know when I'm off by a couple of degrees. And so I also have my small core group of people, and certainly leadership is better when, as you said, there's more space and it's slower, and we're not as reactive in that space between stimulus and reaction. There's our great freedom, and leaders who know how to be not reactive but responsive is really something we need more of. And so try my best.
We've teased it enough, so I feel like we have to get a couple more words about it. Let's talk about the Democratic Party, and then we'll wrap it up. It's like the theater adage, if you show a gun in the first act, somebody's got to get shot in the second act. I would love to hear a little bit about, obviously it's in crisis, but sort of how do you find yourself in it as somebody who, again, has been so a public part of the party up until this point?
Are you assuming I'm in the party also? I'm just going to say, was I invited to the party?
That was specifically for Rabbi Brous.
I would go first.
I also, no, I don't want to go first. I'm just making sure.
I don't know. I watched the inauguration. I didn't see you at it.
You're right. So I certainly don't have any political leanings. You're right. I don't have. I'm very concerned for the party. I'll just I think if New York City is a bellwether for what we're looking at coming down the pike, it's not looking good. As I showed you before we started tonight, Mayor Mamdani came out today when asked whether or not he believed in a united Ireland. Said, I haven't really given that much thought. Let me think about that. That was his latest today. So I think that if it's okay to see Israel through the lens of colonialism, and if Israel is an issue that should be important to Jews, and again, it's only one issue, I'm not speaking about the broader issues, I personally feel that many Jews like me feel homeless. We're not going to vote, we're not Republican, can't imagine ourselves ever voting in any way, shape, or form for what I consider to be a monstrosity on every level to Jewish values and to human dignity and so on. And the horseshoe effect is now becoming more and more scary the more things move forward. Seeing someone like Gavin Newsom trafficking in things that I find very problematic again. So I think I'm deeply concerned about the place for proudly Zionist, Israel-centered, proudly Jewish folk in the Democratic Party going forward. And I think a lot of people are like me in that sense. And so, I don't know, over to you.
I will say, for many years, I would get called by press whenever something would happen. Are Jews going to start fleeing the Democratic Party? And I would say, of course not. Jews are not going anywhere. It's not because of party loyalty. It's because the values of the Democratic Party largely align with progressive Jewish values and taking care of those who are most vulnerable in our society and having the law be just and equitable and creating opportunity for everybody and holding the dream of a multiracial democracy. These are all things that very much align with some of the principles that we've spoken about tonight, and some of which are at the very core of our Jewish values. And I think now we are going to see a shift in terms of voting patterns in the American Jewish community. I will say I don't even know how to I don't know personally how to define myself anymore. I'm not saying Democrat or non-Democrat. I'm saying I'm saying like progressive, liberal, like I think everything's changed in the last 2.5 years. I don't know if others have felt this way too, but it feels to me that the labels themselves are not helpful, and the core values are helpful, and they are still largely in alignment, with the exception that there is a very deeply entrenched, transgressive, seductive, sexy affinity for like real anti-Semitism that is underlying a lot of our politics today. And I think people are drunk on it. I think that that I'm using the language of seductive and transgressive because there's something sexy about being able to say out loud the truth, about Zionism and the truth about Israel.
The lie, the truth that's a lie.
So, and I think what I'm going back to where I started now, which is I think that people have lost their minds. And we must not also lose our minds. And the fact that people put a certain lens on us doesn't mean that we should not constantly be doing cheshbon nefesh, be having conversations about what in the world has happened to religious Zionism, about what is happening in the West Bank, and how every one of us who says that we love Israel can and should be using our voice to speak out against the horrific settler violence that is now a daily occurrence. That we have to build our political and spiritual realities rooted in our own knowledge of what's right and wrong. And at the same time, we have to be honest about where other people are in the world. And I am very concerned about the horseshoe effect. I'm concerned about the both subterranean and the overt anti-Semitism. I think we have to keep talking about it. I am concerned about how many people roll their eyes whenever you say the word anti-Semitism now, because it is real and it's something that we must be talking about. And we have to live into our values. And we have to not be afraid to say that what happened to the Odeh family in the West Bank 2 days ago is an atrocity. And the fact that that happened at Jewish hands in the Jewish state is something that is deeply shameful for us. And we can do better. We must do better. And so I don't want to be told by anyone that we can't talk about it because people hate Jews. Well, I know that people hate Jews. I'm going to define myself based on my own set of values, not somebody else's. So what is going to happen in the coming elections? Hopefully, there are going to be some good, solid liberal Democrats who are going to get elected who share a vision of a multiracial democracy that includes Jews in it, and also is going to be a corrective to some of the policies that we've seen in the last 1.5 years.
I know you want to jump in, but we don't have the time for it. Unfortunately, I wish we did. Just when it was getting good. If only we had more time. Well, lucky for you, we do. I'm joined right now by Rabbis Ingber and Brous, both of whom immediately agreed to sign up for part 2 of Dueling Rabbis. And we're going to start it right now. But you'll have to tune in next time to see it. And because we're taking off for Pesach, you're going to have to wait an extra week. Don't you just love a cliffhanger? All right, I'll see y'all back here for the next double dose of being Jewish with me, Jonah Platt. Chag HaMatzot Sameach!